Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Spiritual Life This Week. My name is Jennifer Allred, and as always, it is an honor to spend this time with you and explore some spiritual topic or practice or conversation that I certainly hope will be helpful to you today. So what I've brought today is nothing new if you are someone who spent some time around spiritual life, whether in our weekly worship services or in these programming times that we spend with you on your broadcast channels or YouTube channel, then you know that myself and my colleagues, Leah and Phil, are all huge fans of poetry, and in exploring the ways that poetry can be used as a spiritual tool or discipline to help us kind of get closer to our potential spiritually, sometimes our wounds or our needs spiritually, perhaps in touch with the beauty of the world or its suffering. So it is just a really powerful tool, and I'm reminded of that frequently. And I know, because I know many of you, that many of you agree. And if you are new here today or less familiar with poetry and with spiritual life, then and particularly welcome you and look forward to sharing with you some of the ways that I think poetry can be an important tool on your spiritual journey. The reason it came up for me at this particular moment in time, because it is, like I said, something that we use frequently, whether in worship or in teaching and learning or in our conversations around spiritual practice and discipline, is because a week ago today, we experienced the inauguration of our new president. And many people's eyes in this country and around the world were on a dynamic and exciting young woman named Amanda Gorman. And Amanda Gorman is a poet, and she is, in fact, the first so-called youth poet laureate of this country. So I don't know a whole lot about that, but I know that it's a new distinction. Most of us are familiar with the term poet laureate as a kind of professional artist who is appointed to be kind of on staff, so to speak, in our federal government and to uphold this tradition of poetry as an art form that we value as a country and as a society. And this designation of a youth poet laureate is something new, and I wasn't able to find much about how that came to be, if it was something to do with the Biden administration, or if it's something to do with the kind of the poetry movement in a larger sense. I wasn't able to discover a whole lot about that today, but I know that it's a new thing, and that she was chosen to be part of the inauguration, and actually that she was sort of discovered or put forth by Dr. Jill Biden as a suggestion or recommendation to the inauguration committee as someone that she thought might be a great asset to the day. And she really just made a splash. I think many of us who saw some or all of the programming last week were struck by her talent, her beauty, both inside and out, and her story. And I know she really blew me away, and I know many of you felt that way as well. So what I want to do today is kind of briefly reflect on some of the ways that poetry can be a tool, a spiritual tool for setting us free, for, excuse me. So sorry, it's that time of year when I know I have some challenges with coughs and sneezes around the temperature and the dry weather. So it may not be the last time I have to excuse myself today to cough a little bit. But at least we know in this day of post-vaccination that I don't have to be quite so terrified of COVID. Goodness. But I want to reflect a little bit on the power of poetry to help us learn spiritually, and also then take us into a reading of Amanda Gorman's poem that she offered for the inauguration, and then some time of silence, and then that will be our time together for today. So why is it that poetry is often seen and used as a spiritual tool? And I think the simplest way I can put it is that I think poetry is a powerful way in which or by which we're able to see things anew or see things differently. It's a way of in kind of facilitating a difficult exercise of shifting our perspective and seeing things in a way that might be new or different or even very old, but some ability to see things differently than how perhaps we do most of the time. And most of us, for better and worse, live in a state of some level of trance or taking for granted the way things are. And poetry kind of shakes that up with the power of language and image and clever and interesting ways of using language that invites us into our own conscious perceptions and perhaps allows us to push through those conscious perceptions into unconscious or more deeply conscious perceptions. So I like to use this analogy of a funnel. If you can for a moment, just picture that shape of a funnel. It starts big and wide at the top and then kind of decreases in and becomes narrow at the bottom. And when we read or write poetry today, when we hear poetry today, you're sort of consciously making that shape with your own consciousness. First, we are opening and widening our consciousness to merge with a power greater than ourselves. So at the top, we're having this broad state of consciousness, and we're merging with that power greater than ourselves, which for some of you may be the words themselves, maybe the fact of the poem itself. Excuse me. Goodness, I apologize. It's embarrassing to be on camera and have to stop myself to cough. So I'll just do the best I can and trust that you'll bear with me. But at the top of that funnel, we're merging with this greater power than ourselves. And it might be the poem itself. It might be the words. It might be God, or however you perceive God. It might be Jesus. It might be the greater body of art. I'm not here to define that for you, but I am here to invite and encourage you to take a moment and reflect on what that greater consciousness or awareness is, or how it is defined, or who defines it. And so then we're focusing on a connection to the present moment, using our senses. And by doing so, we're literally becoming a consciousness flowing conduit, a channel, an electric impulse that allows us to merge with this divine being on top, and then to kind of narrow into this present moment, and to use poetry as a pathway, allowing knowledge from this higher consciousness to find its way by means of this image of the funnel into our human selves. I found a quote that I used to like and had forgotten by Walt Whitman, who said, "Stop this day and night with me, and you shall possess the origin of all poems." So that pausing into the present moment. He was signaling the spiritual nature and quality of poetic wisdom. Poetic wisdom comes from a place that is beyond consciousness, beyond our readily available consciousness, a connected, unified, and spiritual field, which again, at the top of that funnel is with some higher or divine truth. And again, it's not for me to say what that is or looks like or feels like for you, but I did go ahead and make some suggestions of things that it might be. If you're someone who's traditionally religious, then it might be the God of your religion, or some spiritual teaching of your religion. Or if you're not so traditionally religious, it might be something like beauty or art or nature, which allows you to feel connected to a higher reality. And then the top of that funnel collects all of these things, and then allows it to be translated into forms and duality and symbols and words that exist on a human plane. And I'd like to suggest to you that poetry is one of those things that happens or is inspired at the intersection of the divine planes and the human reality. So the more your practice holding your consciousness in a kind of divine funneling shape, the better you will become at embodying poetic essence in your everyday life. And so this is just one of those ways that we can take our spiritual truths and selves and kind of sit with them and hone and polish and observe them, and then be able to kind of take that divine level of truth and create a flow through our human selves. So that's just sort of the image that I brought today. We've talked a lot in our time together about poetry and art and the spiritual. But I wonder if that image of the funnel might make sense to you, to think about the divine and the inspired, the godly, being at the top kind of region of this funnel, where things that are kind of beyond our comprehension and understanding and human knowing still have the ability to collect into this outer rim at the top of our ability to perceive and see, and then to become part of us in a process of kind of flowing from the divine into the human by means, in this case, of the tool of poetry. So I want to go ahead now and read Amanda Gorman's inaugural poem. So if you haven't already, I would encourage you to find a comfortable seated position, or for those of you who are in bed, lying down position. Think as you kind of settle for a moment about your breath, and draw attention to your breath, and just kind of become aware of your breath, and notice, without judgment, notice what your breath is doing. Is it shallow? Is it quick? Is it deep and slow? Is it anxious, excited, sad, peaceful? And just notice. And as you settle, take 2 or 3 deep breaths in and out as you draw greater presence, greater stillness, greater awareness into your being. And use your breath to open your heart, to clear your mind, to support your body as you prepare to hear these words. When the day comes, we ask ourselves, where can we find this light and this never-ending shade? The loss we carry, a sea we must wade. We've braved the belly of the beast. We've learned that quiet isn't always peace. And the norms and notions of just what is, isn't always just ice. And yet the dawn is ours before we knew it. Somehow we do it. Somehow we've weathered and witnessed a nation that isn't broken, but simply unfinished. We, the successors of a country and a time, where a skinny black girl descended from slaves and raised by a single mother can dream of becoming president, only to find herself reciting for one. And yes, we are far from polished, far from pristine, but that doesn't mean we are striving to form a union that is perfect. We are striving to forge a union with purpose, to compose a country committed to all cultures, colors, and characters and conditions of man. And so we lift our gazes not to what stands between us, but what stands before us. We close the divide because we know to put our future first, we must first put aside our differences. We lay down our arms so we can reach out our arms to one another. We seek harm to none and harmony for all. Let the globe, if nothing else, say this is true, that even as we grieved, we grew, that even as we hurt, we hoped, that even as we tired, we tried, that we'll forever be tied together, victorious, not because we will never again know defeat, but because we will never again sow division. Scripture tells us to envision that everyone shall sit under their own vine and fig tree, and no one shall make them afraid. If we're to live up to our own time, then victory won't lie in the blade, but in the bridges we've made. That is the promise to Glade, the hill we climb. If only we dare, it's because being American is more than a pride we inherit. It's the past we step into and how we repair it. We've seen a force that would shatter our nation rather than destroy it, would destroy our country if it meant delaying democracy. And this effort very nearly succeeded. But while democracy can be periodically delayed, it can never be permanently defeated. In this truth, in this faith we trust. For while we have our eyes on the future, history has its eyes on us. This is the era of just redemption we feared at its inception. We did not feel prepared to be the heirs of such a terrifying hour, but within it we found the power to author a new chapter, to offer hope and laughter to ourselves. So while once we asked, how could we possibly prevail over catastrophe? We now assert, how could catastrophe possibly prevail over us? We will not march back to what was, but move to what shall be. A country that is bruised but whole, benevolent but bold, fierce and free. We will not be turned around or interrupted by intimidation, because we know our inaction and inertia will be the inheritance of the next generation. Our blunders become their burdens, but one thing is certain: if we merge mercy with might and might with right, then love becomes our legacy and change our children's birthright. So let us leave behind a country better than the one we were left with. Every breath from my bronze-pounded chest, we shall raise this wounded world into a wondrous one. We will rise from the gold-limb hills of the West. We will rise from the windswept Northeast, where our forefathers first realized revolution. We will rise from the lake-rimmed cities of the Midwestern states. We will rise from the sun-baked South. We will rebuild, reconcile, and recover. And every known nook of our nation and every corner called our country, our people diverse and beautiful will emerge, battered and beautiful. When day comes, we step out of the shade, aflame and unafraid, The new dawn blooms as we free it, for there is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it. Amanda Gorman, the 45th inaugural address. Such beautiful words. And now let's have just a few minutes of silence together to reflect on whatever moves your heart, whether something in the poem or something in the quest and the meaning of poetry in your spirit. as you feel ready to come back into the space where you are, you can just start to flutter and open your eyes, maybe wiggle your toes a little bit. Check in with your breath. Maybe you want to offer a brief prayer, just a thank you or an amen even, if that's helpful. And I thank you for spending a little time with me today around this idea of poetry and spirituality. And I invite you, as you go about your day, to notice language around you and just to think about how being intentional in our use of language and trying, whether seriously or playfully, to use language in new or different ways can really change our hearts, our minds, our realities. And to me, that is always a spiritual task or practice. Anything that allows us to see the world in new ways or different ways. Anything that allows us to access our own hearts and minds and bodies on deeper and truer levels is a spiritual gift. And I commend to you any poet or poetry that you are inspired by in your own lives, or perhaps you want to look up Amanda Gorman's poem. It's everywhere on the internet. And if you are someone who doesn't have the inclination or ability to look it up for yourselves, please let us know. I'd be happy to make sure you get a copy of it. You can reach Spiritual Life on the Pastoral Care Request line, which is extension 111, or you can reach us by asking the help of a staff member in your building. And that can really be anyone, a nurse or an aide or a social worker, your activity staff, your building directors. And if they don't know how to do it, I feel confident that they will find someone who can. Because it's important to us that you know that we are here for you and with you during these times that of this year past that has been so challenging in ways that I know I couldn't have predicted. And also just for life in general, which, friends, at least it's my truth that life can be really hard. It's not always hard, and it can certainly be wonderful and thrilling and filled with joy and peace and gratitude. And it can also be really hard. And we in your Spiritual Life team are here to be with you and walk with you, whether it's one of those easy good times or whether it's one of those challenging hard times. So I know that most of you probably know that and believe that, but in case you were not sure, or in case you're newer to us and you're not quite dialed into what we're all about, then I like to share that with our newcomers as well as our old timers. So may you go forth in peace today, and may God bless you and keep you until we meet again.